Good evening. That was loud. My name is Evan Duff. I am the Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs. Welcome. Thank you for coming tonight, especially to our students. Thank you for being here, staff, faculty, administration, and other guests. The Jefferson Pilot Professorship is an endowed award established in 1981 through the generosity of the Jefferson Pilot Life Insurance Company. It is the highest and most singular honor North Carolina Wesleyan College bestows upon a member of its faculty. The honoree is nominated by a committee of faculty and appointed by the president. Those eligible to receive this award are tenured members of the faculty who have clearly distinguished themselves in ways that set high standards of excellence to which the whole community can aspire. Portraits of the Jefferson Pilot professors are displayed in the lobby of the Braswell Administration Building. The 2018-2019 Jefferson Pilot professor is Dr. Lee Templeton. Every year it's a surprise who the next year's nominee will be, or not nominee, but professor. And last year at this time, I was frantically worried because I knew who it was going to be and did not make preparations to invite their spouse as a surprise. And so I was trying to get a hold of Dr. Templeton's wife, and she thought there was an emergency. And so she is here tonight. Glad you could be here. Dr. Templeton's talk explores two topics that has been on his mind recently, and that is dragons and higher education, and attempts to connect the two in some meaningful way, beginning with an examination of the figure of the dragon and its metaphorical meanings, both from Icelandic, Old Norse, Anglo-Saxon myth, and literature. Dr. Templeton considers current trends in higher education through the metaphorical lens of the dragon, and how successful this will be remains to be seen. It's an honor and pleasure. I now welcome Dr. Lee Templeton to the stage.
Well, thank you, Dr. Duff. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the administration and the faculty for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'd also like to thank Atia Spells, who really did the hard work of organizing and coordinating a lot of this event. So thank you, Atia. And I'd like to thank you all for coming. It is very kind of you to come and listen to me, especially since it would have been so much simpler simply not to come. And I understand there's basketball on tonight too, so it's doubly nice for you to be here. Some of you have endured some geographical inconvenience to be here, and I appreciate that. I will endeavor this evening to ensure your time is well spent. In any case, though, I promise that the next 3.5 hours will be fun. Talks like this present a particular challenge for anyone fortunate enough to give them. On the one hand is the desire to discuss one's particular research interests and area of academic study. On the other is the need to engage a diverse audience, most of whom are not specialists in the field under discussion. Faced with such considerations, I began thinking about what I would like to discuss with you all. Initially, I settled on exploring the preterite indicative verbs in Chaucer's English. But then I realized how absolutely crazy this was, because you all probably know all about that already. So it was back to the drawing board. As I thought about topics that have been on my mind recently, as Dr. Duff said, I eventually settled on two: dragons, because dragons, and the current state of higher education, particularly the liberal arts. And while these two subjects may not seem even tangentially related, I will attempt to connect the two tonight, hopefully offering new ways of viewing each in the process. I was going to say how successful I am remains to be seen, but Dr. Duff stole that line. So we'll just go to the first topic under discussion, and if my remote works, there we go, which are dragons. On the screen, you can see a quotation from Jorge Luis Borges about dragons. And the picture is an actual photograph taken of the Northern Lights, and it looks a lot like a dragon, which I thought was cool. But if I were to ask you to take a moment to close your eyes and imagine a dragon, most of you would have no problem doing so. Indeed, I believe the creatures each of you would conjure would share many similarities. Would be reptilian in nature, scaly with large teeth. Most would have wings. Many, no doubt, would have legs, although some perhaps would simply be large snakes. All would breathe fire, or at the very least, some sort of venom. And there would probably be gold as well. Allowing for some minor variations, images of creatures of this type can be found in mythologies and traditions of cultures around the world. The ancient Mesopotamians in their mythology tells of a hybrid creature called the Meshusu, which is there up on the screen. It's a scaly dragon with hind legs resembling the talons of an eagle, feline forelegs, a long neck and tail, a horned head, a snake-like tongue, and a crest. And as you can see on the screen, this is a reproduction of the creature that was on the Ishtar Gate, one of the gates leading into the ancient city of Babylon. In Egyptian mythology, Apep, or Apophis, a giant serpent with the head made of a flint, is the embodiment of chaos and the great enemy of the sun god Ra. And in this image you can see Set attacking Apophis. And in the back, I believe, is a depiction of Ra. The Ugaritic Baal cycle describes the battle between the storm god Baal and Lotanu, a seven-headed serpent. The ancient Greeks, in their mythology, contained a number of dragon-like creatures, including Typhon, whom the 7th century BCE poet Hesiod described in his Theogony in the following way. From his shoulders grew 100 heads of a snake, a fearful dragon, with dark, flickering tongues. And from under the brows of his eyes and his marvelous heads flashed fire, and fire burned from his heads as he glared. And here we can see a vase, it was a water jug, I think, that depicts Zeus fighting Typhon, or a depiction of Typhon. You can see Typhon on the left a little bit better. The bottom part of his body is very serpentine. He has wings, and he looks very dragon-like. From the Rig Veda, one of the 4 canonical texts of Hinduism, comes the tale of Indra, god of storms, and his fight against Vritra, a dragon that blocks the course of rivers and is the personification of drought. Dragons feature prominently in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean traditions, where they are often revered as symbols of royal authority and power, as well as the life-enhancing qualities of rain and water. And finally, many Mesoamerican traditions contain dragon-like figures, like the Aztec feather serpent deity of wind and wisdom, Quetzalcoatl. And there you see an image of him as well. Not quite as dragon-like as we might expect, but he has some dragon-like characteristics. Even today, in our post-mythic, post-modern, post-truth era, dragons still capture our imaginations and feature in our popular culture. From J.R.R. Tolkien to George R.R. Martin, and from Puff the Magic to Toothless, dragons in their various guises are a global phenomenon. And though they exist as the creations of past civilizations in the modern mass entertainment industry, dragons should not be dismissed as simply frivolous or devoid of meaning. As J.R.R. Tolkien once claimed, quote, "A dragon is no idle fancy. Whatever may be his origin, in fact or invention, the dragon in legend is a potent creation of men's imagination, richer in significance than his barrow is in gold," end quote. It is the rich significance of the dragon that I would like to explore more fully tonight, particularly in relation to those dragons that appear in the mythology and literature of Old Norse, Icelandic, and Anglo-Saxon traditions. In his 1936 Sir Israel Gallant's memorial lecture to the British Academy, titled Beowulf, the Monster and the Critics, Tolkien takes issue with his fellow critic, R.W. Chambers' accusation that the poet of Beowulf focused on insignificant issues that other heroic poets would not have, quote, sold for a wilderness of dragons. In response, Tolkien claims, quote, dragons, real dragons, essential both to the machinery and the ideas of a poem or a tale, are actually rare. His implication is that within the body of medieval literature, there is hardly a wilderness of dragons, but rather only a few. Indeed, according to Tolkien, there are only 2 dragons that he considers significant in all of Northern European medieval literature. Those are the dragon Fafnir and Beowulf's dragon, and we'll talk about both of them tonight. However, as many scholars have pointed out, the wisdom of disagreeing with Professor Tolkien notwithstanding, medieval literature, particularly Old Norse and Old English, contains quite a multitude of dragons. Fans of the History Channel show Vikings, are there any in the house? Okay. May be interested to know that the central character for much of the series, Ragnar Lothbrok, is himself a dragon slayer. In Ragnar's Saga Lothbrokar, or the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ragnar earns his reputation and his nickname, Lothbrok, which means shaggy breeches or hairy pants, by slaying a dragon that imprisons Jarl Harald's daughter Thora. And up on the screen you can see a quotation from the saga. He, Ragnar, heard what Jarl Harald had spoken about. He paid no attention and acted as if he didn't know. He had some clothes made for himself with a strange appearance. They were shaggy breeches and a shaggy cape, and once they were made, he had them boiled in tar. Then he hid them. And when he came to the enclosure where the serpent was, he stabbed at it with his spear, and then he quickly pulled the spear back. He stabbed again. That thrust went into the serpent's spine. Then he twisted the spear quickly, so that the spear point came off the shaft. The serpent's death struggles made such a great din that all the powers shook. And for some reason, they didn't include that in the series. They treat Lothbrok, his nickname, as his sort of last name, which is a bit odd, but what can we do about that? So wild dragons found in the literature are all certainly monstrous, and more often not pose a significant threat to humans. They represent more than just monsters. As Jeffrey Jerome Cohen explains in his essay, Monster Culture, 7 Theses, quote, like a letter on the page, the monster signifies something other than itself. It is always a displacement, always inhabits the gap between the time of upheaval that created it and the moment into which it is received to be born again, end quote. Monsters, then, are constructs of the cultures that create them, projections of the fears, desires, and anxieties of those cultures. As monstrous constructs, dragons can be understood as projections of our fears of nature's power, as well as our deepest fears of ourselves. A closer look at 4 examples from Old Norse, Icelandic, and Anglo-Saxon texts will help unravel the complex and deep social anxieties embedded in the medieval Northern European dragon. Our knowledge of Norse mythology derives primarily from 2 sources, the poetic, or Elder Edda, and the prose, or Younger Edda. Both texts were composed in Iceland by Christian scribes, although the material they contain speak of a pagan past, of what Andy Orchard describes as, quote, authentic echoes of an age already aged when the words were written down, end quote. The Elder Edda is preserved in a manuscript known as the Codex Regius, which was written around 1270 and consists of 29 poems, along with connecting prose passages which deal with the mythological and heroic tales of ancient Scandinavia. The Younger Edda was written around 1220 by the Icelandic historian, poet, and politician Snorri Sturluson. Snorri's Edda is divided into 3 parts. The first, Gylfaginning, or the Tricking of Gylfi, is a systematic account of the whole of Norse mythology. The second and third parts, Skaldskarpamal, the language of poetry, and Hatatal, the language or a list of verse forms, are treatises on the content, style, and meters of skaldic or praise poetry. Although Snorri composed his Edda before the Elder Edda was written, which seems like it's backwards, he draws on and quotes directly from many of the poems contained in the Elder Edda, suggesting that those poems existed in one form or another before Snorri began his work. It is within the mythological poems of the Elder Edda and Snorri's Gylfaginning where we find our first 2 dragons lurking. At the center of the Norse mythological cosmos stands the great world tree Yggdrasil. And you can see here an artist's rendering of it. Hopefully you can make out the details. We are told about this tree in the Voluspa, the first poem of the Elder Edda, and one of my students' favorites, by the way, in which the god Odin awakes an ancient seeress who proceeds to relate the entire arc of history, from the world's creation to its ultimate and fiery end, known as Ragnarok. She says, quote, an ash I know stands, Yggdrasil by name, a high tree drenched with bright white mud. From there come the dews that drop in the dales. It always stands green over destiny's well. Snorri, in the Gylfaginning, provides a more complete picture of the tree, acknowledging that it is, quote, the chief center or holy place of the gods. He continues, the ash of all trees is of all trees the biggest and best. Its branches spread out over all the world and extend across the sky. 3 of the tree's roots support it and extend very, very far. One is among the Aesir, the second among the frost giants, where Ginnungagap once was. The third extends over Niflheim, and under that root is Vergelmir, and Nidhogg gnaws the bottom of the root. Yggdrasil emerges as the centerpiece of cosmic creation, connecting the realms of the gods, the giants, the dead, and although not mentioned in the 2 quotes, the realm of mankind. It is also the source of all rivers, and as such is a key component of human prosperity. Nestled among the roots of Yggdrasil is Nidhogg, the winged dragon whose name can be translated as Spite Striker, or the one striking full of hatred. There's a manuscript image of Nidhogg, sort of hanging below the roots of Yggdrasil, gnawing on the roots. Not much is told about this dragon, except that it constantly eats the roots of Yggdrasil and exchanges threats with the eagle that perches on its uppermost branches, as described in Grimnismal, another of the poems in the Elder Edda. And the part of the poem states, Ratatosk is the name of the squirrel who has to run over the ash Yggdrasil. The eagle's words he must bring from above, and say to Spite Striker below. The ash of Yggdrasil suffers grief, more than men can know. A heart bites above, on each side it rots, Spite Striker gnaws it below. If Yggdrasil represents the vital energies of life, the cosmic forces that nurture the cosmic order, then Nidhogg represents all that threatens them. The Cirrus of the Voluspa provides us with a second glimpse of Nidhogg, further highlighting the dragon's association with destruction. At the end of the poem, after the Cirrus describes the events of Ragnarok, she ends with this ominous image, quote, then there comes there the dark dragon flying, the glittering snake up from Moonwane hills. It bears in its wings and flies over the plain, dead bodies. Spite Striker, now she must sink. These images of Nidhogg are most disquieting. The creature appears to have been in existence since the beginning, a part of the cosmic order since its very first days. As Caroline Larrington explains, quote, pain and suffering are part of the divine world. The decay and pain of Yggdrasil, with its gnawing dragons and serpents, mirrors that which faces all humans. Furthermore, there is no stated motivation for the destruction it creates. No gold hoard to protect, no specific enemy to battle. All Nidhogg does is inflict tortures on the dead, seek to wreck the essence of life, and above all, bring about that which all societies fear most, disorder. Like Nidhogg, the second dragon of Norse mythology represents an equally fearsome force of destruction and chaos. Midgardsormr, the world serpent, also known as Jormungand, is one of the monstrous offspring of the trickster god Loki, and plays a crucial role in Ragnarok. That was the only manuscript image I could find. It's actually a part of a different story that features the world serpent, where Thor, the god, is going fishing and manages to hook the world serpent. And that's why you can see sort of the hook at the top of the image. As Snorri writes in the Edda, quote, Loki had other offspring too. There was a giantess called Angrboda in Giantland. With her, Loki had 3 children. One was Fenriswolf, the second was Jormungand, the third is Hel. Indeed, all 3 of Loki's children are involved in Ragnarok to a significant degree. According to Snorri, once the other gods learned of Loki's offspring and the prophecies linking them to the great destruction to come, Odin commanded they be brought to him. From the Edda, quote, and when they came to him, he threw the serpent into that deep sea which lies round all lands. And this serpent grew so that it lies in the midst of the ocean, encircling all lands, and bites its own tail. And apart from 2 brief encounters with Thor, this is where Midgardsormr remains, encircling the world of men, awaiting the coming of the final battle between the gods and their monstrous adversaries. As I mentioned a moment ago, Ragnarok is the apocalyptic ending of the cosmic order, where gods, giants, and men will perish and the world burn. Odin will battle Fenriswolf and be slain in the conflict. His son Vidar will in turn kill Fenris Wolf, and Thor will face the world serpent. As the seeress relates in the Voluspa, quote, "The earth's girdle gapes over heaven. The dread serpent's jaws yawn on high. Odin's son must meet the serpent when the wolf is dead and Vidar's kin. Then there comes from the famous offspring of Loden, Odin's son goes to fight the serpent. The defender of Middle Earth strikes in his wrath. All warriors must abandon their homesteads. He goes 9 paces, the son of Fjorgyn, spent from the snake that fears no spite. The sun turns black, land sinks into sea, the bright stars scatter from the sky. Flame flickers up against the world tree, fire flies high against heaven itself." And so in his battle, Thor manages to defeat the serpent, but also winds up succumbing to the poison. Like Nidhogg, Midgard's Sommer brings seemingly inevitable death and destruction. For while Odin constantly seeks knowledge about what lies ahead during Ragnarok, he is unable to prevent it, despite all his preparations. Taken together, Nidhogg and Midgard's Sommer, the 2 terrible dragons of Norse myth, embody the chaos and ultimately uncontrollable forces inherent in the world and suggest that the ultimate fate for all living things is, in the end, death. It's occurring to me that's a very sort of, it's a bummer. I should have thought about this a little more. But anyway, I'd like to turn now from the mythological material of the Edda to the legendary tales of the Norse heroes and our third dragon, Fafnir. Fafnir appears in the stories of Sigurd, the dragon slayer, and the histories of his family line, the Volsungs. The primary source for Sigurd's exploits is the 13th century Volsunga saga, or the saga of the Volsungs, although this text is largely based on older poetic sources, particularly the heroic poems in the Poetic Edda, at least 17 of which treat aspects of the Volsung legend. As interesting as the entire saga is, we need only concern ourselves with Sigurd's encounter with the dragon. The images, by the way, are 2 wood carvings that used to be on the sides of a door of a Stav church in Norway. The one on your left, if you can make it out, has Sigurd sort of crouching and thrusting his sword through the dragon Fafnir. The one on your right, no, maybe I have that backwards. Do I have that backwards? All right. Shows Sigurd roasting the heart of the dragon after he kills it, which if you eat the heart of the dragon, apparently it gives you magic powers, of course. Fafnir, however, brings us closer to our modern conception of a dragon. For unlike Nidhogg and Midgard's Sommer, he is the guardian of a gold hoard. As the saga relates, Fafnir is one of 3 sons of a man named Hreidmar. When one of the sons, Otter, is killed by Loki, Hreidmar demands compensation from the gods. The compensation comes in the form of a treasure hoard, which includes a gold ring taken from a dwarf named Andvari, who, according to Fafnir's brother Regin, who, by the way, is relating the story to Sigurd, this is getting complicated, I know, said that the gold ring would be the death of whoever owned it, and the same applied to all the gold. The gold was to be divided between Fafnir and Regin upon the death of their father. However, as Regin explains, quote, "Afterward Fafnir killed his father, and it was murder since he hid the body. I obtained none of the treasure. Fafnir became so ill-natured that he set out for the wilds and allowed no one to enjoy the treasure but himself. He has since become the most evil serpent and now lies upon his hoard." Regin persuades Sigurd to slay Fafnir in order to take possession of the dragon's gold. In order to do this, Sigurd digs several ditches and hides in them, waiting for the dragon to crawl over him. And this is a sort of a representation of it. This is the Ramsund stone. It's a little bit altered in the picture, but it's a carving on a large flat rock that tells several scenes from the Volsunga saga. And you can sort of see Fafnir as that large snake-like creature that encircles everything. And Sigurd is crouching down below and stabbing the dragon. And this comes from the saga itself. Quote, "When the worm crawled to the water, the earth quaked mightily, so that all the ground nearby shook. He blew poison over all the path before him, but Sigurd was neither afraid nor concerned by the din. And when the serpent crawled over the pit, Sigurd plunged the sword up under the left shoulder so that it sank into the hilt. Sigurd leapt out of the ditch and drew the sword out of the serpent. His arms were all bloody to the shoulder. And when the huge worm felt his mortal wound, he thrashed his head and his tail, destroying everything that got in his way. Sigurd's encounter with Fafnir occupies only a small amount of space within the larger narrative of the Volsunga saga. It is not even a particularly challenging encounter. Sigurd easily defeats his monstrous opponent and acquires the cursed gold, which, by the way, will have disastrous consequences for Sigurd later, as you could well imagine. But what makes Fafnir interesting is the fact that he was not wholly other in the way that Nidhogg and the World Serpent are. Those dragons are natural, elemental embodiments of chaos and destruction, present since the dawn of the cosmic order. While Fafnir certainly also represents destruction and death, we are told in the saga that the dragon is extremely large, much larger actually than Regin initially admits to Sigurd. And the dragon also possesses what is called a helm of terror, which Martin Arnold describes as, quote, a magical helmet or mask, or perhaps even a rune-like symbol that causes visual deceptions. So the dragon's size and this helm of terror, whatever that might be, make him a formidable force, the ease with which Sigurd dispatches him notwithstanding. Rather, what is important is that Fafnir is a human who transforms himself into a dragon. And it is this transformation that provides a key to the dragon's metaphorical significance. Joyce Tally Lyonairns, in her book The Medieval Dragon, The Nature of the Beast in Germanic Literature, argues that Fafnir's transformation is important because, quote, his ordinary physical and moral characteristics are transformed into extraordinary indications of inhuman, dragonish identity formed in the crisis of intentional patricide, end quote. I would like to suggest that it is not only Fafnir's act of patricide that corrupts his nature, but also his greed. His transformation into a dragon represents the corrupting influence of gold, and Fafnir thus becomes a figure for the dark side of humanity, when self-interest takes priority over tribal loyalty and collective survival. What Fafnir reveals is that dragons are not just the unknowable others. They are also manifestations of humanity's very nature. The last dragon I would like to discuss is perhaps the most well-known of medieval dragons, Beowulf's Bane, the great dragon from the Old English poem Beowulf. The single manuscript containing Beowulf is most likely composed between 975 and 1025 CE. The fact that the Beowulf manuscript was produced much earlier than the manuscripts containing the Eddas and the Saga of the Volsungs in no way suggests that the story told in the poem predates those Norse myths or legendary heroic sagas. At best, we can say that the tale of Beowulf may be contemporary with the stories of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, since Sigurd is referenced specifically within Beowulf. And as I'm sure you all know, because you read the poem, the action takes place in Scandinavia, in Denmark and southern Sweden. It is fitting that the most famous of the Scandinavian dragon slayers is mentioned in the poem, since Beowulf himself faces a dragon in his final battle. We are first introduced to the dragon in Beowulf as the guardian of a gold hoard. From the poem, then an old harrower of the dark happened to find the hoard open, the burning one who hunts out barrows, the slick-skinned dragon threatening the night sky with streamers of fire. People on the farms are in dread of him. He is driven to hunt out hoards underground, to guard heathen gold, though through age-long vigils, though to little avail. For 3 centuries, this scourge of the people has stood guard on that stoutly protected underground treasury. Within this early description of the dragon, we see many elements that link it to both the dragons of Norse myth and Fafnir. Like Nidhogg and the World Serpent, Beowulf's dragon appears to be an ancient, almost primeval force of nature. He has been guarding this particular treasure hoard for 300 years, but has most likely been alive for much longer. Also like the 2 dragons of Norse myth, this dragon is associated with death and destruction. Again, from the poem, the dragon began to belch out flames and burn bright homesteads. There was a hot glow that scared everyone, for the vile Skywinger would leave nothing alive in his wake. Everywhere the havoc he wrought was in evidence. Far and near, the Geek nation bore the brunt of his brutal assaults and virulent hate. He had swinged the land, swathed it in flame, in fire and burning. Like Fafnir, the dragon in Beowulf is driven by greed, a desire to hoard gold. It is in fact the theft of a single gold-plated cup that incites the dragon's rage and sets it on the path to face Beowulf. Unlike Fafnir, however, Beowulf's dragon proves to be a formidable enemy. It takes all of Beowulf's strength and ability and a little help from a friend to slay the monster, but not before the dragon deals Beowulf a mortal wound, echoing Thor's final confrontation with the world serpent. From the poem again, quote, "Then the bane of that people, the fire-breathing dragon, was made mad to attack for a third time. When a chance came, he caught the hero in a rush of flame and clamped sharp fangs into his neck. Beowulf's body ran wet with his lifeblood. It came welling out." Another significant difference between Fafnir and Beowulf's dragon is the fact that Beowulf's dragon was not once human, as Fafnir once was. Nonetheless, the dragon is closely linked to Beowulf in a number of ways. Both the dragon and Beowulf are aged, solitary rulers. As I mentioned, the dragon has been the lord of his treasure barrow for 300 years. He is referred to by the Old English phrase Hordweard, or Horde Guardian, at several points throughout the poem. By the time the dragon awakes and unleashes his destructive fury on Beowulf's people, Beowulf has been ruling as a king for 50 years. We're told in the poem, quote, "The wide kingdom reverted to Beowulf. He ruled it well for 50 winters, grew old and wise as warden of the land." If we assume Beowulf is in his early 20s at the beginning of the poem, when he arrives at Herat to face Grendel, then he is at least in his 70s at the time of this battle with the dragon. He is also unmarried and without children. He is, in many respects, the sole Folches Weard, or people's guardian. The similarities between the terms used to refer to both the dragon and Beowulf, Hordweard and Folches Weard, is telling. Even more telling is the fact that both Beowulf and the dragon are referred to by the same Old English word, and that word is aglaka, roughly. The word aglaka can be translated in a number of ways, as one inspiring awe or misery, formidable one, afflictor, assailant, an adversary, or combatant. In the poem, the term is used chiefly in reference to Grendel and the dragon, the two monsters. The only other human the word is applied to, besides Beowulf, happens to be Sigmund, the name the Beowulf poet gives to Sigurd the dragon slayer. Used in this manner, the term links the monstrous with the human, and it is this link which lies at the heart of understanding the dragon and Beowulf. For ultimately, the dragon is an anti-Beowulf, or more generally, an anti-lord or king. One of the chief responsibilities of a lord in Northern European heroic cultures was to provide for his people, and the primary way to do so was through the generous bestowal of gifts, through gold and treasure. Common kennings, or poetic names, for lords in Old English poetry are gold friend and ring giver. Gold and treasure was viewed less as a means of individual advancement or enrichment than a means of ensuring social harmony. A good lord would give generously and freely. A bad lord would hoard wealth. And we are told several times throughout the poem that Beowulf is indeed a good king or good lord. As Alvin Lee explains, quote, "Gold is good when intimately associated with and used generously by good men and women on behalf of life and other people," end quote. Beowulf's dragon is the antithesis of these values. It murders for gold and hoards it for its own sake. It fails to distribute rings. It is, similar to Fafnir, an embodiment of greed and self-interest. But Beowulf's dragon moves beyond Fafnir as well. For Beowulf's dragon illustrates not only the damage done to the individual, but to the society as a whole when self-interest and greed are privileged above the common good. After all, once Beowulf is killed, his people are invaded, his kingdom destroyed, and all that remains is the elegy that is the poem. Dragons, then, or at least the medieval dragons I have just discussed, can variously be interpreted as representations of nature's formidable and inescapable power, unchecked violence, and the individually and socially ruinous consequences of greed and self-interest. As such, they function as metaphors for the anxieties and fears within us all. Fear of the unknown, fear of the inevitability of decline and dissipation, fear of the forces both within and without that are opposed to societal bonds and the public good, And while the dragons of myth and literature are almost always defeated, they also turn immaterial and vanish to reappear someplace else. For that is the very nature, according to Jeffrey Cohen, of the monster. No matter how many times Thor defeats the world serpent, Sigurd overcomes Fafnir, or Beowulf slays his dragon, the creatures will return, transformed and imbued with new meaning. As Cohen explains, the monster always, quotes, returns in slightly different clothing, each time to be read against contemporary social movements or a specific determining event, end quote. In order to trace this transformation of the medieval dragon, I would like now to extend the metaphor of the dragon beyond the realm of the Norse myths and the legendary tales to our current moment in higher education. For surely there are forces, dragon-like in their nature, which threaten higher education in general, and the liberal arts more specifically. The dragons that beset the liberal arts are similar to those medieval dragons that represented greed, self-interest, and the undermining of the public good. Broadly speaking, these dragons are the forces of corporatization and commodification that have been steadily infiltrating and reshaping higher education over the past 30+ years. The effects of this can be seen in a number of ways. I'll highlight a few. Institutions of higher education are increasingly being modeled on corporate structures and are adopting the philosophies of the corporate sphere, namely the prioritization of financial considerations and market values over intellectual concerns in academic endeavors. As Jennifer Washburn writes in University Inc., The Corporate Corruption of Higher Education, administrators more and more, quote, come directly from industry or recruited for their corporate know-how, not their educational experience. Corporate influence can have even more direct impact on colleges and universities, as revealed by Neil Gluckman in an April 2018 article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And some of you may be familiar with this. According to Gluckman, a recent open records request revealed the nature of several agreements between George Mason University and the Charles Koch Foundation, a charitable arm of Koch Industries. Gluckman writes, quote, the agreements show that the Koch Foundation and other donors had room to influence the selection and work of the professors whose positions they spent millions to support. Such agreements raise serious questions about academic freedom, and the nature of colleges and universities as institutions that serve the public interest. Henry Giroux, in his book Neoliberalism's War on Higher Education, echoes these concerns, lamenting, quote, the increasing pace of the corporatization and militarization of the university, the squelching of academic freedom, the rise of an ever-increasing contingent of part-time faculty, the rise of a bloated managerial class, and the view that students are basically consumers and faculty providers of a saleable commodity such as a credential or a set of workplace skills. One of the more troubling consequences of the increased corporatization of higher education is the transformation in the roles of colleges and universities from providing an education to providing training, what many call the vocationalization of higher education. In his book, Digital Diploma Mills, The Automation of Higher Education, David Noble articulates the distinction between education and training. This is the quote. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it. In essence, training involves the honing of a person's mind so that his or her mind can be used for the purposes of someone other than that person. Training thus typically entails a radical divorce between knowledge and the self. Here, knowledge is usually defined as a set of skills or a body of information designed to be put to use, to become operational, only in a context determined by someone other than the trained person. In this context, the assertion of self is not only counterproductive, but it is subversive to the enterprise. Education is the exact opposite of training in that it entails not the dissociation, but the utter integration of knowledge and the self. In a word, self-knowledge. Here, knowledge is defined by, and in turn helps define the self. Knowledge and the knowledgeable person are basically inseparable. Rather than educating students how to think critically, embrace the common good, and exercise a sense of social responsibility and support for those values and ideas that make our relationships rich human relationships, rather than relationships of mere use and manipulation, colleges and universities are embracing a more, quote, pragmatic and, quote, practical approach. The most important question now seems to be what sells rather than what is the right thing to teach. As a result of this thinking, majors such as business, computer and information sciences, engineering, Homeland Security, law enforcement, and other related protective services have seen a steady increase in the number of degrees awarded over the last 20 years or so. Traditional liberal arts majors, however, have seen only a marginal increase, if not a decrease, according to statistics compiled by the U.S. Department of Education's National Center of Education Statistics. While these trends can simply be a reflection of the changes in student demand, Washburn argues that the increasing commercial orientation of universities plays a significant role. She writes, quote, "The real threat to the future of liberal arts stems from the rise of a new market model university, in which subjects that either make money, study money, or attract money are given priority," end quote. More and more the university is seen, both by those without as well as those within, not as a place to think, but as a place to prepare students to be competitive in the global marketplace. And while that should be a function of higher education, it should not be the sole function. As Victor Farrell argues in Liberal Arts at the Brink, quote, "Liberal arts education is not an alternative to vocational training. Rather, it facilitates and enhances the vocational experience by honing the way the mind works and stimulating enthusiasm for using it, and by enriching the entire life experience," end quote. The liberal arts are uniquely suited to providing this type of education, but that place is consistently being forgotten or erased by a culture that seeks to commodify and profit off of the work done in higher education in alarming ways. I do not think it is much of an exaggeration to suggest that the liberal arts are facing its own version of Ragnarok. The dragons are stirring, and those of us who have committed our lives to the liberal arts, most of us in this room, like Odin or Beowulf, can see the signs, read the portents, and understand the fate that awaits us. We are on the right side, though it very well may be not the side that wins. The winning side may be, as it is in the Norse myths and Beowulf, the dragons, the forces of greed and self-interest, of the part of human nature that is swayed by the instrumental and easy consumption. Ultimately, what is at stake is not just the academic spheres we inhabit, but the health and security of the entire society. Like Beowulf's dragon, those whose victory meant the collapse of an entire people, so too the victory of the dragons of higher education means the undermining of democracy and social institutions. For that is the true value of the liberal arts. They are the foundation of a democratic society, and of any society that understands the need for its citizens to be engaged, not just with the pursuit of individual achievement, but also with the public welfare. As Farrell explains, quote, "Society needs well and broadly educated citizens. The more liberally educated citizens it has, the stronger it will be." This sentiment is echoed by nearly every serious critic of higher education. Martha Nussbaum, for example, writes, quote, "Cultivated capacities for critical thinking and reflection are crucial in keeping democracies alive and wide awake," end quote. Furthermore, she argues the abilities associated with the liberal arts include the ability to transcend local loyalties and approach world problems as citizens of the world. And finally, the ability to imagine sympathetically the predicament of another person. To borrow a phrase from Tolkien, the defeat of the liberal arts is nothing less than the final defeat of the humane. If all of this seems a bit heavy for a pleasant March evening, let me leave you with a tiny glimmer of hope. Let's return to the Voluspa, the first poem in the Elder Edda, and the seeress who foretells the doom of the gods. After the destruction of the world, after the final defeat of Odin and Thor and all the others, she shares a final vision. Quote, "She sees rising up a second time the earth from the ocean, evergreen. The cataracts tumble, an eagle flies above, hunting fish along the fell. Afterwards there will be found wondrous golden gaming pieces in the grass, those which in ancient days they had owned. All the unsown fields will grow, all harm will be healed, Balder will come. Hod and Balder will inhabit Hrock's victory halls, sanctuaries of the slain gods. She sees a hall standing, more beautiful than the sun, better than gold at Gimle. Virtuous folk shall live there and enjoy pleasure the livelong day. After the destruction, something new emerges, different but perhaps better. Should the dragons of higher education win, perhaps something new will rise from the ashes of the liberal arts. Until that time, we must continue to do what we do best, to teach, to cultivate the habits of mind that celebrate curiosity, a desire to know, and more importantly, a desire to understand, to celebrate the public good and enhance civil democratic society. We must continue to offer absolute resistance so that our defeat, if it arrives, will not be a refutation. We must continue to endure until the dragon comes. Thank you. Yeah, you can ask questions if you want. I can't see anybody. It's really disturbing me a little bit. I have a little All right, there you go. Yeah, so I'm happy to entertain questions, or we can just move on with our evening and pretend none of this ever happened.
What enjoyed you the most about preparing for this?
Oh,
what did you enjoy?
I like doing the research. I like reading books and just sort of digging around and following leads. It's the writing that's really painful.
Amen. You're told
So it doesn't get any better. But it's true, right? I mean, the writing is a struggle, but the just learning about stuff is what interests me the most. So I had fun doing that because I got to follow paths that maybe I wouldn't normally get to do in my normal research. That's a good question. Thanks. Other questions? No, go ahead. Yeah,
Somebody
go ahead.
else. I'm sorry. Okay.
I was just going to say my students are shaming you all.
Which dragon would you say you prefer the most? I mean, I know you were talking about all of them in quite a negative manner, but
Right.
which one would you see you like?
Two. I don't know. I like Beowulf's dragon just because I've read Beowulf so many times and I've experienced that dragon so often. Not, but yeah, that I would say that. Other questions? Yeah.
So, how would we go about slaying the dragons of higher ed today?
That's
Which
not
I agree
in
is
my
all
thought.
too real.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's obviously more than one thing, right? I mean, there needs to be a large-scale sort of reevaluation of sort of the way we view a college education, the way we view education in general, I think, starting from elementary school up through secondary and post-secondary education. But I don't know for sure if there is a way. The thing about Ragnarok is that it's inevitable, right? We can't stop it. Odin tries. He tries to learn as much as he can and gain as much knowledge and wisdom as he can, but he can't stop it, which is just a really positive thing to say to all of you here tonight. So yeah, I wish I had an answer. Other questions? Yes, Mary?
Did the mythology classes you're teaching right now help inspire you into?
Yes, they did. Yes, I'm teaching a couple of mythology classes. The honors class this semester is mythology, and I'm doing a smaller class on mythology, and it's been good because we've discussed quite a number of these texts and issues, and it's really been helpful to be able to read them and talk about them with others as I work on that. Yeah.
And I know it's a shame they don't move it here.
It is a shame.
Oh, darn.
Other questions? Yes, Dr. Fairbairn.
If I could go back to the question about what we should do,
Yeah.
I would just say that we need to hire people like you.
No, I don't know about that.
We should be very careful about who we hire, and we are not always.
And you hired him, so.
I'm aware of that.
Yes.
So, are all dragons so dangerous, or
No.
some of the other international?
Yeah, it really depends on culture, I think. The northern European dragons are dangerous. But in the Chinese, Japanese, Korean traditions, those dragons are often more benevolent. They are often seen as, well, sort of good luck in some cases. I don't know enough about them to say more than that, but they're not all bad. You know, just who you meet, I guess, the dragon that you meet on any given day. Other questions? Yes? No, Chad.
I'm going to try to get this out so that it makes sense. If your dragons are a betrayal of what holds us together,
Yeah.
in some ways, is that an individual Beowulf's personal flaws, or one of the other heroes, or is it his people who have betrayed him, and those negative values have collected in this serpent that is now attacking the king, almost as a betrayal of his leadership?
It's a very good question, and as I assume you know, in the poem, Beowulf chooses to fight the dragon by himself. The 70-year-old guy, right, says, you know what, I don't need the help of my men or an army. I can do this on my own. Might be mistake number one. But he takes 12, 13 other guys with him and tells them to kind of sit off on the side. And when he's in trouble, they all run away, except for one. But what's important is, in this culture, the giving of gifts, like I told you about, like I said, it helps with social harmony, and it also sort of cements a bond that means that the warriors are going to help when they're needed, and they don't. And so we could see that as a larger failure of a culture that maybe perhaps is valuing money now more for personal gain rather than the bonds that it creates. The only one that survives, or not survives, well, he does, but the only one that helps Beowulf is this young warrior named Wiglaf. And before he goes to help, he gives a rather long speech to the other men, essentially saying, hey, don't you remember all the times we pledged our loyalty when he gave us these gifts, and now you're turning your back on him? Perhaps if he hadn't given that speech and just run to help Beowulf, Beowulf would survive. But that's he highlights that fact, right? That there's a failure here in the entire system, right? And in many ways, the poem is an elegy for this culture that has fallen away. Interestingly enough, written down, maybe even composed by a Christian scribe who's looking back with probably a little bit of head scratching, but also a little bit of maybe admiration for a culture, and yet aware of the tragedy of its demise. Yeah.
Okay, so follow-up question. That was a great answer.
Thank you.
To relate that through another question to your theme, are the dragons, though, selling the education and one's buying it?
I don't know. I think, right, so it's a loose metaphor, right? It can be used in a lot of ways. I think, in my mind, the dragons are really these forces that are maybe not always embodied, right, in individuals, but more of just a general sort of attitude or expectation, or I don't know what other ways maybe to describe it. I think sometimes they can be individuals, but I think more it's a larger sort of cultural turning point we're kind of in the middle of. That, as I said, it's troubling for us in this room, those of us that teach, because it means our jobs. But I think it's also more troubling for our entire civilization, democracy, right, society. Yeah.
So generally, in these stories, it's, one side or the other. You have to kill the dragon, or you're going to die.
Right.
Taking that to the liberal arts, is there a way, or do you see any ways where we could negotiate?
Negotiate with the dragon?
Yeah. Where, without losing sort of what we see as what education should be.
I hope. that we can. I mean, obviously we need to, right? We need to find some sort of middle ground, I guess. But certainly not, I mean, in the text, no, you can't negotiate with the dragon. And it's not you fight the dragon or you die, it's you fight the dragon and you die. There's a difference, right? Except, Sigurd survives, like I said, survives for quite a long time, but that cursed gold, that ring that's cursed, ultimately does, and then his brother-in-law kills him instead. But even he cannot escape that fate. It's a delayed fate, but it's there nonetheless. Yeah. Yes.
So this was going to be a question, but it becomes more of a statement based on the last question. So I think there can be a negotiation. I think that we, or as the liberal arts professors, can open up dialogue and communication with those parents and those decision makers to explain how learning outcomes and what we do here in the classroom does translate. You know, it doesn't have to be a direct correlation of engineer to an engineering job. It can be learning outcomes in an English class and how I can do well in XYZ careers, own my own business, whatever it is. And so I think it does become a negotiation, and I think we can do a better job as an institution, society, to explain how the learning in those areas translates to how they can be successful in whatever profession they choose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in the past couple of years, there have been, stories where, CEOs are asked, what are the skills you're looking for in employees? And a lot of them do say that they want critical thinking and writing skills and the ability to speak. More importantly, the ability to learn new things, which of course is what liberal arts does, right? And so highlighting those things might be helpful as well, right? To show that, it's not just the skills that you learn, it's everything as well, right? That is necessary. Yes, ma'am.
Doesn't that a little bit feed into the problem? Because now you're taking the concept that just what you did, you learned about dragons for your own edification. Well, to teach a child too, but the idea that you should want to read something and learn something just because you can.
Right.
We now describe that learning something that isn't applicable to this career is still useful because you can use it to be better at that career. It's still saying everything we learn has to, in some format, serve a purpose.
Yeah.
And maybe we should say, learn things just because you can and you want to.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. And I also recognize the irony in giving my talk as part of the Jefferson pilot. I make no apologies. Any other questions? Thank you all very much.
I was waiting to hear where the Avengers fit into this, or Khaleesi, if she was going to show up somewhere, but if you're not a Game of Thrones person, you would not have caught that reference, and I've never seen it, but okay. So with that, we'll move to the next part for tonight. Not only do we have past faculty emeriti who are in the room who were Jefferson Pilot professors, but also faculty that are still teaching for us that were past Jefferson Pilot professors. So I would like for all of them to please stand at this time so we can recognize you. And at this time, I'd like to ask our president, Dr. Dewey Clark, to come up and give the announcement of who the next Jefferson Pilot professor is.
I will be brief. I realize I'm the only thing standing between you and the basketball game with the free food out here, so good evening. It's my pleasure to announce the 2019-2020 Jefferson Pilot professor. This professor has been with North Carolina Wesleyan College for 12 years, and the Jefferson Pilot Committee have this to say in their recommendation. This candidate has maintained an impressive research agenda, having published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals, with many more in the pipeline for submission. He has put much effort into his research, which has involved collecting rock samples from upper Michigan Peninsula outcrops and analyzing those samples for the presence of concordant fossils. Notably, this professor has included Wesleyan students in this analysis of his research samples through their participation in independent research and special topics courses. This commitment to mentoring students in the context of his research project is an important part of the learning experience for those students. And now, your 2019-2020 Jefferson Pilot Professor is Dr. Jeff Coolidge.